Hey everyone, Wrath of the Lich King is still a long way off, but it seems like a lot of you are already hyped about it, looking at Wrath videos on YouTube. So let's talk about it. This will be our first Wrath video, and we will be making a few here and there between now and the end of TBC, so make sure to subscribe to not miss them. Anyways, for this video, I figured let's have a look at some of the things that we forgot were added or redesigned in Wrath. And there's a lot of those, from the mount tab to the barber shop to the glyph system and so on. Today we're gonna explore 12 things that you probably forgot were added in Wrath. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, I guess let's start from the beginning. So, you've been farming Sunwell for months now, Wrath is finally releasing, and you're ready to spend all your day leveling from 70 to 80 in Northrend. The first thing you may have forgot about is that Wrath was the first expansion to allow players to choose where they want to level first. I guess Blizzard at this point saw the insanity that Hellfire Peninsula was back in 2007 and the lags and crashes it incurred, and they decided no more. So now, if you want to go to Northrend, you have two choices. Number one, you can just use the boat or zeppelin in your capital city, and this will take you to Borean Tundra. Simple, a straightforward choice, and one that most players will make. But also, if you head to either the Undercity Zeppelin if you're Horde, or the boat in Menethil Harbor if you're Alliance, you'll be dropped off in Howling Fjord, where you can start leveling from there as well. Obviously, for Classic Wrath, most serious people will probably just spam dungeons all the way to 80. And eventually, if the dungeon finder is in the game from the launch, you may not even need to go to Northrend to do that. You could just do that from Stormwind or something. But moving on, speaking of hitting max level, here's something you probably forgot about: the server first achievements. When the achievement system was introduced in Wrath, Blizzard also introduced these realm first achievements. Those covered more than just hitting level 80. You had realm first achievements for being the first human or blood elf or anything at hitting level 80, realm first achievements for being the first of a certain class to hit level 80, realm first achievements for being the first at clearing the highest difficulty of any raid, and those gave titles by the way, and even realm first achievements for being the first to reach max level cooking or alchemy or any other profession. As far as I know, Wrath was the first and last expansion where Blizzard used those type of achievements, until surprisingly very recently in Shadowlands, where they introduced realm first Shadowlands Keystone Master, which has you clear all Mythic Plus dungeons at 15 or higher first in your server. It's a shame that those were removed because they were really cool, but hey, I guess Blizzard noticed that a lot of abuse and drama with them and decided to just cut them short. To stay on the topic of leveling, do you remember Heirlooms? Indeed, those were introduced in Wrath of the Lich King, and all the way from the start of the game actually. Those required a certain amount of emblems to buy, which we will talk more about in a minute. And when you bought one of these, you could just keep them forever and trade them to any of your alts, and they would increase your XP gained. When you equip those heirlooms on an alt, they would scale to your character's level, and basically those would be the best gear you could ever have on that slot at any given level. You didn't have to replace them anymore. Well, to be fair, heirlooms in Wrath only covered shoulders, chests, trinkets, and weapons. The rest of your armor you should still look out for, but those 4 pieces on their own made you quite powerful. I always loved heirlooms. I think they're one of the best ideas for making leveling better for alts. In retail, I had every class and race at level 120 in BFA, and I swear if it wasn't for heirlooms, I would never have done that. That being said, in retail, heirlooms are way more advanced. First off, they cover pretty much every piece of gear now, and you even have a heirloom mount that you can use from level 1. But yeah, let me ask you guys, would you want to have more heirloom pieces in Classic Wrath, including a mount maybe? Let us know in the comments. Okay, speaking of mounts, let's talk about them a bit, because there's a lot to be said about mounts in Wrath. First off, did you know that the collection tab was added in Wrath? Indeed, it was a thing in Wrath and all the way from the beginning. Well, it was called the pet tab for some reason, but it was there. It looked quite different from the way the mount tab looks nowadays in retail for sure, but if you had multiple pages of mounts, there wasn't no way to quickly and easily search through them. But who cares, this is Wrath, there was only a handful of mounts in the game at this point, unlike the 700 something unique mounts we have in retail nowadays. But yeah, pretty much now when you get a mount, you right click it, and instead of riding it, it now goes in your mount tab under pets in your character tab, and from there you can just press the button that says mount and voila. This even works for pets too, for pet collectors out there, who will eventually get rewarded in the future with the inclusion of pet battles. Other than that, Wrath also saw a few different changes made to the mount system. Namely, mounts could now swim. Well, at least that was the case in patch 3.1, and only for ground mounts. Using a flying mount underwater still dismounts you. Also, every race can now ride any mount they want. Learning riding has been made cheaper overall, and the cast time for summoning any mount has been cut down to 1.5 seconds instead of 3 seconds. And that's pretty much it. But yeah, all those changes weren't all from the launch of the game. They were added gradually throughout the patches. That being said, there's a chance Blizzard will just introduce them all from the start of the game, like they did with the training cost and level requirements for mounts in TBC. And of course, Wrath of the Lich King was also the expansion where we saw the introduction of 2 and even 3-seater mounts. Those were generally extremely difficult or expensive to obtain, but they were there for people who wanted to put in the time or the goal to obtain them. Interestingly enough, most of those passenger mounts were added in Wrath, and not a lot were added after that in retail for some reason. But one mount that I have fond memories of was the X-52 Touring Rocket. This was the only 2-seater flying mount in the game, and surprisingly enough, everyone could get it through the Recruit a Friend program. The Recruit a Friend program went through many changes throughout the years in WoW, and actually it was even a thing at the end of Burning Crusade. Obviously, we don't have it in TBC now, and it's gonna be interesting to see if Blizzard introduces it again for Classic Wrath, so we can obtain this awesome mount. But we'll have to wait and see, I guess. Okay, enough talk about mounts, let's now move on to raiding. Raiding in Wrath was very interesting. Blizzard experimented a lot with raiding in Wrath, but Wrath was also probably the first expansion where the masses of people were starting to dabble with raiding, thanks to the lower difficulty and all the great loot you could get from it. But do you remember raid difficulties? Originally, when Wrath released, we only had Naxxramas, Eye of Eternity, and Obsidian Sanctum, and all those original raids were quite similar to how they did in TBC, with the only exception that now you can either choose to do them with the typical 25 players or with only 10 players. This was a gift from God for many guilds. Now, maintaining a raiding guild no longer required having a whopping 25 players to manage. With just a close-knit 10-player community that you knew and you could count on, you could experience all the raiding content that World of Warcraft had to offer. For me at least and my guild, this was a huge deal. And then in patch 3.1, we obviously got Ulduar. Ulduar, which is for many regarded as the best raid in WoW, worked quite the same. Just 10 men and 25 men. The raid was significantly harder overall, of course. But now, if you wanted to have an additional challenge, you had what's called hard mode. Hard mode was basically something you had to do during a fight to make the fight harder. It was anything from pressing a button to not doing a mechanic to leaving mobs alive on a boss. And it was awesome. But Blizzard had other plans. They experimented with that for one patch, then they introduced the heroic difficulty with Trial of the Crusader, a toggle you would choose on your character just like you would for switching between 10 and 25 men. Except now you can also do 10 men heroic and 25 men heroic. Heroic is a bit different from hard mode, in the sense that it's not something you have to do anymore. You just fight bosses with more HP and mechanics now, and if you want it to be easier, you could just do it on normal. And then, of course, after Trial of the Crusader came ICC and then Ruby Sanctum, and the raiding system stood like that until they introduced Mythic difficulty with Siege of Orgrimmar, which was a completely different beast. So that was raiding, but raids also introduced a system that a lot of you probably forgot about, the emblem system. In TBC, we have Badges of Justice. Pretty straightforward. If you do a heroic dungeon, or when Sunwind releases, if you do any bosses period, you receive a badge of justice. Those can be exchanged for raid equivalent gear, and that's a way for non-raiders to have some raiding gear if they want to. In Wrath, they looked at this system and they completely went nuts with it. Basically, every patch introduced a new type of currency. It started with emblems of heroism in 3.0 and then all the way to emblems of frost in 3.3 with ICC. You could obtain these by killing bosses or by doing heroic dungeons. And basically, you could exchange those emblems for lower tier emblems to complete an older set if you wanted to. I know this looks super complicated, but this system was super awesome. It didn't really matter for heroic raiders who were swimming in gear already, but for the casuals who were looking to clear their normal mode raids, those were a gift from God. And that encompasses the Wrath philosophy, I guess. It was a super casual friendly expansion, and this system, in my opinion, is what shows it the best. Let's now end the video with some miscellaneous things that you probably forgot about. To start with, you probably remember that the barbershop was in Wrath of the Lich King, but do you remember how rudimentary it was at the start? You could only change your hairstyle, hair color, and markings. Nowadays, you can even change your gender or posture with it in retail, which is nuts. Do you remember the glyph system? A system that Blizzard imagined for WoW, and it was basically meant to add more depth to your character customization and choice. Obviously, it ended up quite different. We all basically chose the best glyphs for our spec, and that's pretty much it. But with the glyph system also came in the inscription profession. I personally got caught completely off guard by this when researching for this video. I didn't remember inscription at all, but when I checked out, I remembered that inscription not only allowed you to make glyphs, but it also allowed enchanters to finally sell their enchants on the auction house, thanks to Heirlooms. That's what brought it back in my memories, because I remember how big of a deal this was to me back in Wrath. To stay on the topic of professions, Wrath adds an insane amount of utility and usefulness to engineering, to the point where I think all DPSers will want to go engineering because of how good Serenite bombs are in Wrath. Everyone was using them in their rotation, and they were just too good and powerful. Engineering also had Jeeves, your own personal bank anywhere you want, which also acted as a repair bot of its own, and you could even summon a mailbox. So really, engineering will probably be the most popular profession in Wrath. Finally, one last thing I wanted to mention, which will also serve as a preparation for classic Wrath, I guess, the Dalaran teleportation rings. Those used to cost a whopping 8k gold, and they basically give you a way to teleport to Dalaran for free, from anywhere you were in the world. I remember getting those super early because of how useful they were, and I used them all throughout the game. So I guess start saving for those, they will be very useful. And that's pretty much it. That's everything I have for you today. I just figured this video would be useful for all of us to remember a bit of the systems that Wrath introduced and to prepare for them in advance. There's still a ton of stuff that we could talk about, but those were the most important things I could remember. If you guys know any forgotten items or systems like this in Wrath that you think the community should remember, drop it in the comments and I'll probably just do a part 2 to this video in the future and I'll feature your comment hopefully. With that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, remember to give it a like and subscribe to the Classic WoW Curios channel for more content like this. I will see you guys in the next one very soon. Bye for now.